dum dum. Hello, everybody. I can see why Scott liked doing this so much. This is great. I've been looking forward to this all day. This is episode 2. I did an episode yesterday of my first slightly cringy, nothing close to the legend of Scott Adams. But yesterday I went into some length at expressing, one, my gratitude for the example that he set as a human being. And I think also I elaborated on what it was that I think that he did, because he really did have a rather peculiar way of engaging with people online. And I mentioned that I was doing something similar, but with my daughters, and oftentimes in a private setting instead of public. It takes more courage to do all that in public. And Scott Adams definitely had plenty of that. Let me go ahead and I've got a few friends here that I know are going to be joining. And so I don't want to do the simultaneous sip yet. But because this is so new, they may not know where to go. Let me see if I share this here. This might help. Come on over. Come on over, baby. For the simultaneous sip. Okay, there we go. One of the things I've been doing is listening to a lot of Scott Adams interviews. One of his interviews that I listened to yesterday was the one with Tim Ferriss from 10 years ago. And I didn't get through all the way through that one, but I really enjoyed it. Interestingly, Scott Adams, like a lot of the stories that Scott was sharing, that he has been sharing over the years, are repeat stories, right? So I'm hearing him share a lot of the same stories, but with different people. Sometimes he gives the short version, sometimes he gives the longer version. But one thing he talked a lot about was the simulation. More recently, but 10 years ago, not so much. 10 years ago, in discussing his path to success, he puts a lot more emphasis on the affirmations and the impact that this had on the subconscious in terms of helping to guide and put the right information in front of him. So one example of that is this show on how to become a cartoonist that just so happened to be on TV after he starts making these affirmations. And, and that wasn't the only one. He also talked about how he wanted to do well in the stock market and how he got this idea to invest in Chrysler. And then he got this idea to invest in another company. And both of these companies exploded in price, meaning the price went up a lot. And how he was thinking to himself, oh man, I should have just believed more in these affirmations and like my gut instincts, which I'd say our broader society is oftentimes kind of poo-pooing on, to say, oh no, override your emotions, control your emotions, make logical decisions based, that you can consciously walk through. As opposed to believing in a hunch, for example. But this concept of believing in yourself, and especially if it is in line with these affirmations, these intentionally chosen, I want to say goals, except that he says that goals are for losers, right? But in terms of processes. But to imagine getting the thing that you want somehow. and the attribution that he placed to that, I think, is very important, right? Like, what does he believe is driving that? Does he believe that there's some, or did he believe that there was somebody on a cloud, listening to him, like some kind of a deity, hearing him give those affirmations and then delivering because he had faith in them? No, that seemingly was not part of what Mr. Adams was expressing. But he did go from 10 years ago talking to Tim Ferriss, emphasizing the subconscious. And then 10 years later, when he's talking to Jordan Peterson, Peterson's mentioning the subconscious. But at that time, 6 months ago, Scott was shifting the focus to this, I guess you call it the simulation argument, which is the same or similar to the one that Elon Musk makes. And it wasn't just with Jordan Peterson. He was also sharing the same argument with Naval Ravikant. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the nature of this, of the difference between those two. Like, is it all that different? It certainly sounds different, but the why behind Scott Adams is certainly something he was spending a lot of time thinking about and trying to process. So I wanted to share a little bit about that today, just because I've spent so much time listening to these interviews. It was on my mind. But before I do, let me go ahead and start the simultaneous sip. All right, here we go. All you need is a cup or a mug or a glass, a tankard, chalice or stein, a canteen, jug, a flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything better, the simultaneous sip. 1, 2, 3, let's go. All righty then. Okay. So the story that Scott likes to share, or that he liked to share a lot, was, it kind of goes with this first book. It wasn't his very first book, but it was the book that I would say is the one that really gripped a lot of people's attention, the How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big. This is the book that I first found. This was my introduction to Scott Adams, maybe a decade ago. And in this book, he's talking about a bunch of things, but one of these things is this idea that clearly conceptualizing one's goals or a future state that has different circumstances, like, for example, being a famous cartoonist, was one that he mentioned. Sorry. Another one is that someday the president of the United States would ask for his opinion about something, which also happened in 2018 with Donald Trump, with these stocks that I mentioned. So where did this come from? So he met a woman who he believed to be, just given her accomplishments, she seemed like she was quite brilliant with it, not somebody who just believes in magic for fun without thinking it through. And she was a huge advocate for this idea of these affirmations. And the psychology of this, I think, is I'm in the camp with Jordan Peterson in the sense that I think that his argument's quite compelling and it seems to really check out. And it relates to essentially the filtering challenge of the subconscious mind in terms of determining what information should be consciously available to you. And so the degree to which we as conscious social mammals are using that consciousness and our imagination to conceive of goals, or again, like just future states in which your circumstances are different, like becoming a famous cartoonist, then the more our subconscious becomes aware of what those goals are. And then in terms of our own conscious experience, what he starts to notice, and what others that have followed in this that are advocates of it say happen, is that all of a sudden they start to notice things that are relevant to their goals, and their sort of gut feelings about things become more and more relevant to that goal. And so seemingly that does a lot in order to help us to get where we want to go. And that makes perfect sense to me. And that checks out. I think part of this is that the challenge of the subconscious in terms of delivering the correct information actually is an extremely enormous challenge. And I can get into that. That's something that that my family spends an awful lot of time actually talking and thinking through and writing about ourselves. So I think that the magnitude of that problem of consciously determining goals, affirming those goals, and how much lift you can get from the subconscious when you do that is proportional to how complex reality is relative to our conscious perception of reality. Okay. So if your conscious perception of reality is the same as reality, then this should do nothing, because we can consciously conceive of everything. And so simply affirming what our goals are doesn't change anything, because, well, we already perceive everything, right? That's clearly not the case. So our subconscious is giving us thoughts and feelings. Maybe I should explain some of that just to be clear. Like, well-meaning scientists exercising best practices have found that the answers to yes or no questions that people are asked can actually be determined by scientists that have hooked people up with the right nodes to their brains to basically measure, which sides their brains are lighting up that correlate with when they're about to say yes versus when they're about to say no. And so if the circuitry in your brain can reveal patterns that very consistently front run telling you or telling the scientist if you're going to say yes or no before you know if you're going to say yes or no, then that means, there's a lot going on at a subconscious level that's essentially determining what it is that you perceive. Your emotions, most definitely, but your thoughts, the things that pop into your head, those are coming from your subconscious. So your subconscious is going through lots and lots and lots of information, trying to determine what to put in front of you, right? That's the basic idea. Now, if your conscious perception of reality is reality, then the thinking through and affirming what your goals are should do nothing. But let's say that reality is twice as complicated as your conscious perception. Well, then maybe you might get a little bit of lift. Although if it's half, you're already consciously aware of what your goal is. So, you're probably still largely able to seek out that information that will be relevant to your goal. Now, I mean, any rudimentary sort of analysis into the limitations of consciousness should confirm to anyone with half a mind to learn that the actual gravity and magnitude and size of reality is infinitely larger than our conscious perception. And that's worth talking about. So another Peterson talk that seemed to be informing Peterson when he was talking to Scott Adams 6 months ago, and you can look that one up, or I can share that if you're curious about where that is. Feel free to comment, or I can put it in the description. But Peterson was he's quite familiar with magnitudinal differences between the size of our consciousness, our conscious awareness, relative to the entirety of what our subconscious is doing behind the scenes in terms of giving us information. And some estimates around that. I mean, you can kind of get an idea yourself about what it is in terms of consciousness. Just take a moment. Let's all take the next 5 seconds. Think about whatever you want. Just try to conceive of and experience as much as you can for the next 5 seconds. Ready, go. Okay. So what was that? Well, whatever you're seeing for 5 seconds. So there's like a 5-second video. How high is the quality? Whatever you were looking at, the quality was high, but everything else is kind of fuzzy. So probably not that great of a 5-second video. If you were reading, or if you were thinking through verbally in your mind, how many words can you fit into 5 seconds? 30, maybe. Not too many. A lot of our perceptual awareness is visual. I think on average is something like 70%. So suffice to say, it's not much. Consciousness, as much as we conscious humans tend to, talk a big game about how great it is to be conscious, it's not much. Certainly not much compared to these large language models. These large language models or machine learning models, like the kind that learned AlphaGo, learned Go by playing against itself like 1 billion times in an hour or something. There's a lot going on there. And that is more akin to the way that our brains really work. Consciousness is like pretty dinky compared to, say, like the total processing power of the human brain, which is another thing that people can, scientists can measure this. Now, there's a lot of range for how much processing power the human mind is capable of in terms of how you go about measuring it. Lots of subjectivity involved in that. But not so much so that you can't make statements and have some kind of an understanding about the magnitudinal difference between that and what we just did a little bit ago with 5 seconds of just consciousness. 5 seconds of consciousness, 30 words. How many words does, a ChatGPT prompt, go through and review in 5 seconds, which is often how long it takes to run a prompt on these models, unless you're like asking it to think longer, which I almost always do. I want to try to get the best answer I can all the time. So that difference is huge. For the sake of simplicity, somewhere in the ballpark of like 1,000,000 to 1 in terms of how large the processing power is of the human brain in total versus how much information we seem to be consciously able to conceive of in any given second. Some estimates that you can go ahead and look up and verify for yourself, like total processing power of subconscious versus conscious mind. Life 3.0 is another book that kind of tries to share some of these estimates, but it's roughly 1,000,000 to 1 give or take an order of magnitude, with subconscious processing something like maybe 50 million bits per second, and the conscious mind being more like 50 bits per second. So not much, right? Well, if it's 1,000,000 to 1, goals matter. Goals matter a lot. Goals matter a ton. So Scott Adams talked for over a decade about the importance of affirmations. And I think for me, and this is just me, just a potato, from one potato to another, it seems to me that what's most important about this is really just the clarity of what it is that we want. What do we want? And if we know what we want, then how do we communicate that at a subconscious level? Because that's really what we're trying to do. We're consciously aware of who we are in this moment, or at least we think we are. We're consciously aware. You know, we have our 5 senses. We also have our imagination. And with this, we can redirect our attention using agency and free will towards things that, towards whatever we want. But one thing that Mr. Adams seemed to suggest is to think very high, think big. What is it? What do you want? Like for him, it was to become a famous cartoonist, or to have the president of the United States see him as being wise enough and knowledgeable enough in a field that a sitting president would invite him over and ask his opinion about something. That's kind of cool. You know, there's no reason why you can't have fun with some of these things. You know, imagine what it is that you would want. And then if you do this, and I think he said something like, well, sometimes it would take him years, like solving his the challenge that he had with the speech impediment. That took years. I think he said that took 3.5 years. Some other things like the stock market affirmations he was doing, that was pretty quick, within like a few weeks. The affirmation that he did around trying to get the attention of and go on a date or something with a girl that was out of his league, above his pay grade, I believe is the way that he put it. That was something that happened pretty quick, within a couple months, I think. But the idea here is you need to give your subconscious consistency and clarity in terms of what it is that you want. And if you consistently and clearly conceive of that, imagine that, articulate that. He mentioned writing it by hand, although you could also type it. He said that it doesn't matter. That we can start to be essentially helping our subconscious to give us the information that, and also the gut feelings, the emotional sort of impulses, that in ways that remind me a little bit of Harry Potter taking liquid luck. Right? He needed to get this memory from one of the professors that was going to provide a clue as to where these Horcruxes were coming from. He takes liquid luck as it's a potion that somehow makes you very lucky, and that coming out of this, he managed to actually get the thing that he needed, but it was from this very convoluted, sort of strange little. At one point, he runs into Hagrid, who is hosting a little funeral for a giant dead spider, and it's like, well, what does this have to do with the mission that Dumbledore sent you on? And Harry Potter's like, I don't know, but he just continued on in this way, and then at the end of the night, somehow he managed to get what it was that he needed. That I think makes a lot of sense with this framework for thinking through the connection between consciously derived goals, affirmations, and getting a much clearer signal from the subconscious towards those goals. And even if you're not consciously aware, to start to appreciate how one's subconscious is working for you and helping move you towards those goals, even if you're not consciously aware of it, which is kind of neat. I think that's been something that my family has been experimenting with more, because you don't necessarily want to just jump right in there and assume that that's the case, right? You can see how that would be a dangerous thought experiment. To just assume that your subconscious is understanding and appreciating all these affirmations and it's doing a bunch of things behind the scenes to make that happen. And so, your anxiety level's down because you just have faith somehow, and it's all going to work out, but maybe not. I think that a lot of these things, this is something that Scott said a lot. He was giving a presentation of his book maybe 10 years ago. It seemed to be to a audience of people that many of whom also had similar kinds of speech issues, because he was making a lot of reference to specifics of that, and the crowd seemed to be resonating with that quite a bit. But one of the things that Scott Adams said a lot was, I'm not giving you advice. You don't want to take advice from a cartoonist, something that he said. I thought that was very humble and very cool. I think what he really meant is that we're all potatoes, but we're also different. Unlike potatoes, we're all, unique individuals. We all have our own strengths and interests and passions and temperaments and experiences and different frames, different perceptions, different goals, and all these things kind of lend themselves to advice being very difficult to give from one person to another. And so he didn't frame this so much as advice. He framed it more as like, here's what happened to me. Here's what I did. I'm going to be honest with you about what it was that I went through. Like, he was very skeptical, for example, of these affirmations at first. In fact, he remained skeptical for months. I think it took like at least 2, maybe 3 of these tests before he became willing to say, hey, I just need to aim higher here. This seems to be working. So that's what I'm doing. I think that's right. I think that I want to be consistent with Scott Adams on this one. I'm not giving advice here. I'm trying to share my own honest perceptions of what I believe to be the insights and perspective of a very wise human being that left a lot, more than 10 years worth. I mean, if you add all the cartoons, I mean, wow. He left a lot of puzzle pieces and clues that I could be using to integrate into my own thinking for many, many years to come. It's one of the reasons why I like the idea of continuing these live streams in a similar vein. I think that some of this is by example. But what does this do in terms of providing, if it was advice in the sense that one were to try it on, kind of like a piece of clothing, like put it on and see if it fits. Try having clear goals and affirming those and writing those down every day. For me, I am doing it by also communicating it in words during this live stream. That's also helping. So feel free to comment actually in the chat maybe share something that you want. Writing it down is good, but I think it might even be more powerful to write it down in a way that's somewhat public, because there's a now I'm going off the rails here. This is not a Scott Adams thing. I'm just thinking to myself, okay, if the Jordan Peterson framing and articulation of this is correct, which seems to be consistent with what Scott Adams was saying 10 years ago, frankly. He explicitly mentioned the subconscious to Tim Ferriss, and was appreciating this idea of like the filtering problem. That creating, that increasing the strength of the memory, anything you can do to increase the strength of the memory of that affirmation is going to help your subconscious to remember it and internalize it so that it knows that that's a priority. I mean, you have a lot of competing priorities. I think that's one of the big challenges for humans today, is that relative to 100 years ago, we probably have 100x more distractions. And by distractions, I mean other potential goals, things that we might want, right? And so I think given that, we just have to work that much harder to go out of our way to try to be clear with ourselves what it is that we're really trying to achieve, right? We can't just say it once consciously and be like, well, that's my goal. I'm clear. I wrote it down 2 weeks ago, and I went back and thought about that again recently, and yep, that's still what I'm trying to do. And it's like, nah, if you really want something, if you're really trying to do something, if you're really trying to get somewhere, if you want to be somebody, you want to go somewhere, you better wake up and write down your affirmations every day, apparently. That's the Scott Adams approach. Yeah. But if I live stream it and talk about it with my friends, with my family, writing it down, if I'm taking actions toward it, all those little things are like just adding more and more and more weight into that subconscious, affirming, hey, this is where we're trying to go. This is what we want. This is what's meaningful. This is what's valuable. The science on that checks out. All right. Now, that leads me to the simulation. Let's talk about the simulation. But first, I need to heat up my coffee. So I'm going to go heat up my coffee. I'll be right back. I have a second coffee. I need to get the Scott Adams mug. I know. I can't. I need to get his books too. I'm going to get his books. I'm going to affirm this. I have some new goals. Okay. Goal number 1, get Scott Adams coffee mug. Goal number 2, buy all of his books. I got the how to fail at everything and still win big. I got it on audio, but the man's been such a powerful, positive influence on my life that I should buy his books. I should probably put a link to what his organization is trying to do as well. I'm going to be doing that too. Those are all goals of mine now, and I want to affirm those, and I'll report back as to whether or not that just made it really easy for me to get that done. Because I do want to, for sure. Make the app amazing. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Wanna be somebody, wanna go somewhere, Better wake up and pay attention. All right. So one of the other interviews that Scott Adams did that I listened to in the past, 48 hours, was one with Naval Ravikant. And Naval's cool. He's one of these guys that, a decade ago-ish, I had a little more time, which is great. I'm 40 now. So 10 years ago, I was 30. And I actually had enough time to really start to dive in and learn more about the world. Like I kind of had a lot of the things that a lot of people are trying to get early on in life. And largely because I married the right person, that just became easier. So Naval Ravikant and Scott Adams were two of those people out of maybe a dozen or so. Jordan Peterson was he one of them? Yeah, I think he might have been. If he wasn't by then, he was by like 2017. Someone that I was trying to learn from, pay attention to, and kind of triangulate my own thinking with. And so Naval's having this conversation with Scott Adams 6 months ago. And one of the things that comes up is this concept of the simulation. And I think that this might be because Elon's talking about it a lot. And Elon's so smart that when he starts saying things, a lot of people just kind of agree with him. Like Joe Rogan's kind of got to that point with some things. He's like, when are we getting to Mars? You know, when are we going to be able to live as long as we want? Like he's just asking Elon and just expecting Elon to just give him answers at this point. I think he's like, well, if the guy can make rockets that take off and land, and he can like make people walk again with Neuralink, and like you reach your point, I think even if you're a highly skeptical person, that when you accomplish as much as Elon Musk, you sort of start to let your guard down and just start to believe that this person can predict the future and knows everything, right? Not totally. Like I think Joe Rogan's brilliant, and I think that he definitely holds on to his own mind. That's not necessarily a bad way to go. If you're going to pick somebody on this planet to try to lean on a little bit when it comes to understanding the future, trying to make sense of things, I think Elon's up there. I think the problem is when he has a financial incentive for things like, I don't know, AGI, for example. Like he's selling a large language model called Grok. And to the extent that people believe that that Elon's robots will make work obsolete, or at least something people only choose to do for fun if they want. I mean, this is stuff that Elon's saying. He's like, 3 years from now, jobs will be optional and we will all have universally high income. And by the way, we're all living in a simulation because everything that we experience as humans can basically be replicated with ones and zeros, even though in reality is actually built in atoms, not bits. And that is, I think, where the disconnect begins. So, little background on me. My wife and I actually have quite a bit of experience in, shall we say, big data models and machine learning. And we wrote a paper that we published in a book 7 years ago, talking about the nature of machine learning and its implications for financial markets, and I'd say just the broader economy. And the implications are really big. But at the time, before all the hype, when we were just going through the facts and just, understanding the nature of these models, we concluded that there isn't anything fundamentally different about machine learning than traditional statistics, which is true in the sense that you're writing code, structuring a model, and you're using math to derive forecasts from inputs of data. You have data going in and you have forecasts coming out. And how you structure that model, there are definitely differences. One difference is that if you're using traditional statistics, there's closed form solutions that you get where you have a finite number of variables. That's, might be like 30 different variables that JP Morgan bank uses to say determine whether or not you should get a mortgage or a credit card. I'm coming from the finance sector. So that's what that looks like, is you have a bunch of variables. Those variables might be like your FICO score, whether or not you're married, how long you've had a credit history. So there's a bunch of variables. And then you use statistics to essentially measure coefficients associated with those variables. And then you output a score, and then score determines things like whether or not you get a mortgage or like what the interest rate would be. But then you have these machine learning models, and specifically deep learning neural networks of any kind. Okay, so these neural networks, a big difference with these is that they're so complicated because you can throw a whole kitchen sink of variables, and the relationship between all these variables can essentially be as complicated as you have layers in your neural net. Okay. But fundamentally, it's still just correlations. At the end of the day, machine learning models are deriving correlations between sequences of words that are in its training data. That's what the training data of a large learning model consists of, is words. And it's outputting words. So it's using words to forecast words. That's what it is. And it's statistics. And it's not nearly as sexy or sci-fi-ish and exciting to point that out, but it's true. Another thing that's true about large language models that's the same as traditional statistics is that humans have to actually explicitly give it goals. You tell it what it values. You say, okay, here's your goal. For an unsupervised model, it would be things like your goal is to take these input pieces of data and look for groupings using some mathematical formula. There's lots of different options, an infinite number you could choose from, that essentially try to group more familiar pieces of data or entities of some kind together. So for example, a clustering model of people that are applying for mortgages. Look for people that have similar kind of patterns of behavior. And all of that is defined by the data, right? So there's unsupervised models, and then there's supervised models where you're explicitly telling it, what something is, like dog or not dog, but you're the one telling it as the human. You're explaining to it, no, these are dogs and these are not dogs. And until you label it as one or the other, you can't create a goal like identify more dog pictures on the internet, right? So as of yet, no human being has figured out a way to write free will into software. That is to say, to be able to give the computer, no, you come up with your own goal, be autonomous, right? And it's like, well, no, you can try to write an algorithm that says, okay, here's how you're going to come up with your goal. You're going to evaluate a bunch of different potential goals, and then you're going to use this function to try to rank order all these goals. And then you're going to pick the goal at the top because that has the highest score unless these things change. And then you might, change your goal based on these circumstances, but you're still writing all of that as the engineer into the goal function. So even if you write up a goal switching algorithm, your algorithm is still going to be following your human input parameters for following that goal switching function, right? So nobody's figured out how to give the ability of coming up with goals to a computer. And at the end of the day, these software algorithms, even for machine learning, is bounded by the same rules that apply to all models. One of those is, for example, garbage in, garbage out. If you have a whole bunch of crappy data going into a model, then crappy outputs will come out. Like one reason why Elon Musk is probably, saying, "Oh, I'm going to give $1 million to whoever comes up with the best essay." Well, what's the data set that Elon Musk has that he's using to try to compete with, say, Gemini and Google? It's Twitter. How did Twitter start? It started out as a way for people to share up to 140 characters with other people. That's not a lot. That's pretty short. And if you build a large language model based on people restricted to very short little snippets of words, it's really hard to have a model that can beat, say, Google, that has access to people's emails going back 20, 25 years. Emails not being restricted by 140 characters. So, it makes sense that Elon would be trying to build up the sophistication and depth of his data set, because out of all the different social platforms, Twitter probably, at least in terms of its historical data set, that's not the one I would want, So that's one of the challenges that I'm setting up to express about this, the simulation argument, is that there's this huge leap in logic that Naval Ravikant was pointing out. I think I'm in the same boat as Naval here, that if in order for you, well, maybe I should let me go ahead and give you the nature of the argument as Scott Adams and Elon Musk put it. Same thing for Joe Rogan. I think Joe Rogan's kind of buying into this a little bit too. So this idea that two assumptions: one, that humanity doesn't blow itself up or destroy itself, and two, that technology continues to improve. Okay, so if those two things happen, then eventually technology will get to a point that's so good that we can start to create simulations of reality that are so good that they're basically, indistinguishable from reality. And then if that's the case, then in some future state with that kind of technology, it would be trivially easy to create trillions of simulations of that reality. And so if that's the case, then what are the odds of you being in the actual real world versus like one of these trillion simulations? Well, obviously, you're probably in a simulation because there's trillions of those as opposed to only one reality. Therefore, we're living in a simulation. That's the argument, right? Completely jumps over this canyon-sized logical assumption that what you can create in bits can be analogous to what we can build with atoms. That's the huge logical leap that is very self-serving to Elon. Even if he's not doing it for self-serving reasons, it is self-serving, because the more he can get people to buy into the idea of AGI and, we're going to have these robots that can just replace all the jobs, and so working will be, optional. We can all have universally high income. Oh my God, it's going to be so great. I'm so excited. It's like, okay. that definitely makes it more. It creates an incentive for people to buy more Tesla stock. It creates an incentive for people to build content on X instead of somewhere else like Instagram. It gives people an incentive to buy Tesla's full self-driving instead of, like, oh no, like the he's going to start to increase the price of that because we're about to get out of beta mode. And it's like, yeah, I actually think that's going to happen. But it kind of hypes up whatever Elon's doing. But in the process, I think it was confusing to people like Scott Adams, who is not coming from a place of having worked with these things, whereas, I am. And if you actually built these models, like you can be somebody who builds these models and totally fall into kind of believing in some of the sci-fi stuff. I'm not saying that if you're building these models that you can't fall into that. But at least if you're building these models, there are some very important questions that should be coming to mind. Certain skeptical, rather obvious in your face questions, like the inability to actually write autonomy into software as one. And so I think that this is where I kind of feel like the Scott Adams from 10 years ago, and using the subconscious framing of explaining the power of affirmations, like that's a sufficient condition. It seems to me that's sufficient in terms of being able to explain the why behind how he was able to achieve the things that he achieved and the changes that he had in perceptual awareness without needing to go down this rabbit hole of simulations. So that's something that I was thinking about while listening to all these interviews. I'm like, why is he so interested in all these simulations? And I think it's just cool to think about. Like, it's kind of fun to think about. Like, what if we're living in a simulation? But I'm kind of in the Naval camp of like, what's the point? Like, what does this actually do in terms of changing, what's actionable? This term actionable, I think, is important. That's something that Scott Adams, he would talk about that too, but he didn't talk about it strictly in that way. I like to use this word actionable. We do that a lot at home. This idea of whether or not a frame or a mental model or a problem or a circumstance, is there something that's actionable about it? Meaning, will it change your behavior? If you accept something as true or not, does it change your behavior, or does it imply a change that you should have in your behavior? And that's important, because if a particular frame or a change in perspective or some new information, if it has no actionable implication, well, then maybe you don't want to spend too much time obsessing over it. Maybe it's not particularly important, because if it's not going to change your behavior, does it really change anything? That's something that Naval was pointing out. And now that's not always true. Sometimes something can seem like it has no actionable implications, but trying something on as a frame and evaluating it can still be useful, because maybe you just haven't seen the implication yet, right? Maybe there's something about living in a simulation that I haven't thought of that has some really important implications. The only one I've been able to think of, though, is that, if we're living in a simulation, at one point Scott said, what happens if I die, then maybe I'll just wake up in a gamer chair and be like, actually, welcome back, Scott. It's only actually been 5 minutes since your last since the last time that you went through one of these simulations. So yeah, in real time, that was 5 minutes, even though it was 69 years of your life, right? in the simulation. So I guess in one sense, it could make it easier to think of yourself as being a potato. That seems to check out a little bit. Like he definitely approached his last 6 months in a way that I think was just so full of dignity. He had so much. He set such a great example of courage and being positive and trying to set just an amazing example of how to face mortality. I mean, wow. And maybe when I start to get towards the end, I'll start thinking life is a simulation too. You know, because the idea that it's just going to end, I think, has always been a big challenge for humans. And there's the Holy Grail, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Bum ba-dum ba-da-ba-dum, bum bum ba-da ba-da-ba-dum, bum ba-dum ba-da-ba-dum, bum bum ba-dum, bum bum ba-da-bum, bum bum ba-dum ba-da-ba-dum. They wanted to live forever. This is the chalice that Jesus drank from, right? The Holy Grail. Well, if death is the end and we're not living in a simulation, it makes it harder to see our lives as being potatoes. I think that's a powerful frame, but it's not always accurate. I don't think that Scott Adams was a potato. I think that he was an incredible human being. And I think that he left a tremendous gift for humanity with his life. I'm rooting for Elon and everybody that is in his team and anybody else that's trying to help to make the planet make the species a multi-planetary species. Because I think that we're more than just potatoes. I think that being conscious social mammals with an imagination puts us in a special category that we should definitely try to take care of. That's what I think. And I think that I'm really glad that Scott Adams was thinking 10 years ago about the subconscious and about teaching people how to have goals that they're willing to imagine and believe in, even if they can't consciously conceive of all the ways in which their minds could really take that and start to find paths to success well beyond what they could imagine consciously. Because we don't really have much with that consciousness. It's a sad little piddly 50 bits per second compared to maybe 20 or 50 million bits per second of the rest of our whole minds, right? Consciousness is a tiny speck compared to everything we got going on up here. And then whatever we got going on up here compared to all that is, oh man, oh boy, are we adorable trying to wrap our heads around something like that and then communicating it in words. Oh my goodness sakes. We as a species are just so adorable trying to use our words to communicate our lived conscious experiences with each other to try to make heads or tails of reality. Oh, hey there, sweetie pie.
Hello.
You want to say hello?
Okay.
You can just say hello from there and then
Hello.
go. That's good. You can go back to doing your thing.
Okay.
It's baby number 2. Oh, there's also a phone over here that buzzes on this table every 5 seconds. Can you find it and take it away? Isla! Isla, help! Sorry.
What?
There's a phone on this table that is buzzing every 5 seconds.
So.
Yeah. Can you find it and then take it away? There it goes again. There it is.
It's mommy's phone.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Where was I? Okay. All right. So, what was this all about? Well, I've been listening to a lot of Scott Adams, and a lot of people have been. At this point, my feed on X is just a list of other people being like, "What am I supposed to do at?" And then 9 o'clock for people Central Time, or I'm on the East Coast, so 10 a.m. Like, what am I gonna do at 10 a.m. now? And I used to dial in and hear this lovely man with his cabinets in the background. Dum 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 dum. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the highlight of civilization. I mean, when you're used to hearing that every morning for years, and other people are there too, and you're sipping together, and it's like, oh my goodness, it's just this beautiful thing. Wow. And that's gone. And then you think, well, now what? I think that Scott Adams he's one of those people that after he dies, I think he just becomes legend. And unlike legends of the past, he left a lot of projects. A digital resume that is a glorious example of how people don't need to try to find the elixir of life or the holy grail or believe that they're in a simulation in order for them to live forever or have a legacy that can give back to humanity for hundreds, thousands, who knows. They just have to be willing to be honest and have some skill at communicating and have the courage to share their story with the world so that other human beings can maybe find that and use that to try to help supplement their own lived experience. And he did that. Wow. Within a month, I'll probably have listened to more Scott Adams than I did in the past 10 years. And he died over a week ago. But he definitely lives on. I mean, wow, does he live on? He's living on in the minds and thoughts and prayers and imaginations and hopes and dreams and aspirations of certainly thousands, if not tens of thousands, maybe hundreds, maybe over 100,000 people around the world. That number could grow over time because he really was an incredible mind. But I think what really made him so incredible was his honesty and courage and willingness to share without putting on some fancy show, but just trying to, hopping on a live stream and just trying not to put a bunch of filters on, but to say what seems to matter most to him, even if it made him look silly sometimes, or, he said things that people disagreed with, or if he got canceled from things. I mean, that's hard to do. But I don't think we're living in a simulation. I think that's what makes it that much more special. I think that's part of where the value of life comes from, is the scarcity. So just be cautious. If somebody tells you that they can recreate everything that is using software, just make sure that that person doesn't benefit financially in every way from you believing that before you let it seep into your head too far. And I don't think that one needs to believe that we're living in a simulation in order for us to live an amazing life that can carry forward in profound ways, even if our consciousness ceases to exist. I think that the journey of being able to make our way out of that, which is something that I think that Scott Adams really did. I mean, 10 years ago, I think he nailed it. I think he nailed it in that first book, How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big. He definitely he found something. He found a string and he started pulling on it. And then he started live streaming and sharing that with the world. And wow, did he start something beautiful with that. Really beautiful with that. If you're watching this and you've been moved by his life, and you're just really curious like me about trying to continue that conversation, feel free to reach out. I'll put some more information in the link. Yeah. There's so much to be grateful for. This is such an exciting time to be alive. I think believing that we're in a simulation diminishes that. I don't think we need to do that. I think we need to believe in ourselves and believe that if we set our hearts and minds towards something, we can achieve great things. I think that that's what Scott was trying to teach us. I don't think he was trying to teach us all to believe in a simulation. If you go back and you listen to his work over the past 10 years plus, it wasn't about that. I think he was interested in that because there's a lot of really interesting technology that's being developed, but that wasn't the point. That wasn't the point. Anyway, I'm excited to be doing more of this. I'm enjoying myself. So I don't think I'm going to quit. I think I'm going to keep going. So I'll see you all tomorrow. Take care. Bye.